What's happening, guys? Good morning. Thank you for tuning into Rules for Rebels. Gonna do a little bit of a different video today. Let me know in the comment section below if you guys like this kind of content and if you'd like to see more of it, or maybe it's not really your thing and you prefer more of the entrepreneurship stuff. But really, in today's video, I just kind of wanted to introduce a concept and maybe an alternate lifestyle to you guys, and it goes by the name of either FI, which is Financial Independence, or FIRE, F-I-R-E, Financial Independence, Retiring Early. And if this is a topic that you guys are interested in, some additional resources you might want to check out. There's three interesting subreddits. You have Financial Independence, which is r/Financial Independence. You have FIRE, Financial Independence and Retiring Early, and you have LEANFIRE, which is kind of an extreme, kind of FIRE with a lean to extreme frugality. So I guess essentially the idea is just increasing your income as much as you possibly can, cutting your expenses as much as you possibly can, which means like not keeping up with the Joneses, not necessarily needing to have the new car, maybe trimming your leisure budget, maybe don't be going out to expensive dinners or expensive clubs all the time, have some friends over for a barbecue, have your friends over for cocktails and a game night. Basically just increasing your income and cutting your expenses with the idea of retiring much earlier than other people retire. And it doesn't have to be a frugal retirement, but a lot of people are trying to, maybe after retirement, keep their yearly expenses, say under 40 grand or something. And the big idea is being able to live off of passive income. So by increasing your savings rate, you're going to be able to put that much more into investments, businesses, stocks, cryptos, whatever else it may be. And then the idea is that you live off that investment income. Now, I kind of have my own twist on FIRE, and actually one thing I'd like to see a lot more of in the FIRE community is almost nobody talks about entrepreneurship and side hustles and creating businesses. It's really all about, most of the people in this community are working 9-to-5 jobs, but they're being very frugal, being very smart with their money. They have strict budgets, and they're trying to save as much as possible, and they are really intelligent with investments and things like that. One really interesting thing about FIRE to me is if you have some passive income coming in, whether that be a YouTube channel, whether that be a course you sell, a blog, a small business you start, an Etsy store, if you have some other form of income, and you're able to stock away some money, and you have some passive investments paying you in money, you really don't need to make that much money at whatever business or side hustle you have going. That's kind of just gravy, right? That's kind of just icing on the cake, having that going for you as well. So, I guess that kind of brings on another concept of FIRE, Financial Independence and Retiring Early, which is a lot of people want to do this so that they can leave behind their job. And most people don't necessarily plan on, I'm just going to sit on a beach or go fishing every day, right? Like a lot of these people, their plan is actually to just work on passion projects. So maybe somebody's into woodworking, and maybe right now they couldn't support themselves full time, like making crafts and selling them on Etsy. But, if they retire, that's just a little bit of extra income that they have coming in, and they can focus on things that they're passionate about and that they enjoy doing. So just to give you guys a little bit of a background on myself, I was kind of a screw up through my 20s. I didn't really hold jobs. I bounced around to a lot of jobs. I wasn't very good with money. I was spending way more than I had coming in. Even though I was going to school and kind of going to school on and off, working part-time jobs, hopping between jobs. I still like to go out with my friends and hit the bars. I still like to take trips. And so what did I do? I got credit cards, right? And I racked up a bunch of credit card debt. And by my probably early to mid 20s, just a couple years into being able to go to the bars and kind of do all that other stuff, I was in, 10, 11, maybe even as much as $15,000 in credit card debt. And that was kind of a big wake up to me that I kind of needed to get my stuff in order. So basically what I wound up doing, I bought a long-term CD. I used that CD as collateral, took a loan out from the bank, paid off a bunch of credit cards. I actually wound up, I had one card with a really high balance. And I don't know if credit card companies are still doing this. I was actually talking with a buddy of mine who's trying to get out of debt right now. I don't know if credit card companies are still doing this, or if they were a little bit more generous back following like 2008 and following the crash when so many people were defaulting on credit cards. But what I did, I called up one of my credit card companies and I was like, look, I make $24,000 a year. I take home this much a month. I'm never, ever going to be able to dig myself out of this hole. can you do anything for me? And so basically the agreement we came to, I voluntarily closed my card, so I couldn't make any more purchases. They agreed to do, I think it was 1% interest. So, coming from like 19% or 28% interest or whatever I was paying at the time, 1% interest is going to make me put a lot more towards principal and make a much bigger dent in that. So the other catch was I had to allow them permission to direct deposit it out of my account, and they wanted $400 per month. Now, at the time, I think I was taking home $800 or $900 every 2 weeks. So $400 per month was, like, what's that, like a... Sorry guys, camera fell there. So $400 a month was a lot of money to me. That was like a quarter of what I was bringing home every month, and it sucked, and I really had to watch my budget and be really frugal and things like that. But what was really amazing is after, not necessarily after the first month, but after 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, I actually saw this enormous balance actually shrinking. Like before, I was barely paying off the interest. Like, even though I'm throwing a ton of money at this card every month, it doesn't really look like I'm owing any less after I'm paying all this. But once I got it down to the 1% interest, I actually started making dents in the amount, and I'm seeing it go from 12 to 11 to 10 to 9. And at one point I remember looking at it and I'm like, okay, 6 months and I'm out of this. I'm never going to let this happen again. And it's kind of funny, when I was younger, and I think a lot of people can probably relate to this. When I was younger, I kind of cared about, like, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but playing Mr. Big Shot, or like, I had no money, but I wanted to go out to the cool bars where you got to pay a $40 or $60 cover charge. And, I'm buying bottles even though I'm making, $10 an hour or whatever. And I wanted to have, name brand clothes and nicer stuff. And it's kind of funny now that I've gotten a little bit older and I actually got a little bit of change in my pocket that I actually could afford to do those things if I wanted to. I just really have no desire to. I'd much rather have some friends over at the house for, a game night and a few drinks and, smoke a few bowls or whatever. I'd much rather do that than be out at some club. Would I like to have a nice car? Sure, but I'm not really that into cars, so is it really worth like shelling out all this money? I'd much rather put my money into investments and be able to retire a few years earlier rather than, driving a BMW or whatever. And this isn't necessarily telling anybody how to live. It's more so just presenting another option for you guys. So I think a lot of people, or even just our country as a standard, the USA as a standard, we have the term starter home, right? Because a starter home, you buy a small, reasonable house with your first job, and then as you start making more money and your income grows and you get better jobs and, maybe you get married or whatever, and now you have a 2-household income. Well, then the starter home goes out the window, and now you got to buy your McMansion or whatever else. You start off driving a Honda Civic, and now you got to buy the Beamer or the Benz or whatever else. And this is kind of what we refer to as lifestyle inflation. And lifestyle inflation is basically allowing your lifestyle to grow with your income. And that's one thing that I never wanted to happen to me. So, pretty much all through my 20s, I wasn't making a whole lot of money. I was making well under $30,000. And it was tight, right? I'm not going to lie, it was tight. Like, I didn't always have money to pay all the bills. I didn't always have money to put into my gas tank, etc. But as my income increased, yeah, I did allow myself to be a little bit more comfortable, right? Like, I might have the occasional meal out. I might do a few more splurges, but for all intents and purposes, even though my income has probably gone up 5 or 6 times, I still live like I did back when I was making, $26,000 a year or whatever, and that's allowing me to sock away a lot of money. And that's kind of what FIRE, Financial Independence and Retiring Early, is all about. It is trying to, most people who are kind of really into this movement are trying to save anywhere between like 40 and 80% of their monthly income. And kind of a cool way of looking at this, and I heard Alex Becker talk about this as well, and I think this is kind of a cool way of looking at this concept, is think about what it's going to cost you either monthly or yearly in terms of expenses. So for me, it's probably $35,000. Like, if we really get down to the nuts and bolts, like shelter, transportation, car insurance, food, etc. So, I don't know, for me, we'll say it's $30,000. Every time I make $30,000, that's either 1 year early I can retire, or it's, if I wanted to kind of do the Tim Ferriss thing and take a mini retirement, it's 1 year that I can take off of work. And if you want to break it down into months, $30,000 divided by 12 is, I don't know what that is. What's that, like $1,200 a month or something like that. If you want to look at it that way, every time you sock away $1,200, that's a month that you can take off work. So if you can sock away 12, 24, 36, 48, 60, 72. So if you can sock away $7,200, that's a 6-month sabbatical or mini retirement you could take potentially if that's something that you actually wanted to do. Now, this kind of brings me to one other subject, and it's I'm kind of naturally frugal, so this is pretty easy for me. Like, I'm not really into cars. I don't really need like a huge impressive house or anything like that. I'm not really into, I mean, you guys can probably tell, I'm not really into fashion or clothes. So, I mean, there's really not a whole lot of stuff out there that I want to spend my money on. I guess kind of my vices would be food. I like a good meal out. I like good food. I like to smoke my weed, right? That's a little bit of an expense. And I like to travel. So those are kind of my three things. And I'm not telling anybody to skimp and not enjoy life. And that was kind of my next point is I'm kind of naturally frugal, and I could probably be a little bit less of a tightwad and enjoy life a little bit more. And I think that's an important thing, is I think balance is always important. What's the sense in having all this money if you're living a miserable life to get it, and you can't even enjoy things that you do because you're like, oh, I spent this much money on that. I have a buddy, it's actually my girlfriend's brother. He's very much so the live for the day. You could get hit by a bus tomorrow. You can't take it with you when you go. Let's spend everything. And he's a fun guy and he's really generous, but I think there's probably a nice middle ground between me and him where you're frugal, you're trying to save money, you're trying to do the FIRE thing, but you're also not afraid to kind of enjoy life and things like that as well. And this whole FIRE and financial independence thing is also kind of very tied into minimalism, like why spend money on things that you really don't need. But yeah, guys, not telling you how to live. It's just kind of, I think most people kind of expect, the fact that we have the term starter home, I think is kind of disturbing. It kind of shows that, like, a small, modest home isn't good enough. As soon as you're able to, you need to jump up into something else. And my experience, I was going to share a story with you guys. So prior to buying my house now, I was living in, say like a 3,000 square foot home. Now, it really wasn't, this is a little bit of a twisted story because I actually had like a 1,200 square foot townhouse in not really the best side of town. My folks wound up moving to South Carolina. They didn't want to sell their house, so they gave me a discount on rent and said, hey, come live at our house for the next couple of years. We're not ready to sell it. You can pay us rent. Like at the time, I couldn't afford, their rent and property taxes and everything else, so I probably only covered about half of it, 3/4 of it. But we had that little arrangement, and so I kind of got used to living in a nice big house, and it was cool, but like it's a lot of space to clean. I'm heating this big house, and I'm really only spending time in 2 rooms, and it's kind of like, what's the point? So when my folks wound up moving back to Chicago, I was like, you know what, I need to start looking for a house. And when I started looking for a house, I was looking at smaller stuff. I actually wound up going smaller than I probably needed to. I almost wish I would have gone a little bit bigger, but probably the ideal size for me would be about 1,500 square feet. I actually bought a smaller 2-bedroom house. I'm probably, somewhere between 1,000 and 1,100 square feet. 2 bedrooms, kitchen, laundry room, 1 bathroom. The 1 bathroom is one thing I wish I would have thought more about. Like a lot of times I'll have friends or my girlfriend's family crash over at the house, and we'll go get breakfast or go get coffee in the morning, and you come back and everybody's got a poop and I got 1 toilet. So that's kind of the one downside of that. But I mean, for all intents and purposes, why have this big McMansion that I'm spending all my time in 1 or 2 rooms, yet I'm spending all this money to heat the thing? I think there was actually a study done a few years ago where they put kind of like heat sensors on 3,000 or 5,000 square foot homes, and you can tell by people's body heat where all the time is spent. And most of these people with McMansions, even though they're paying property taxes on these big homes, even though they're having to clean these big homes, even though they're having to put furniture in all these rooms, they're spending like 80% of their time in like 30% of the house. So it just didn't really make a whole lot of sense for me to do. I remember when I got my mortgage pre-approval, they pre-approved me for $475,000. I wound up buying a house for $200,000. So you don't need to max everything out. You don't need to impress anybody. Just because you can have a nicer car doesn't mean you have to have a nicer car. Your home doesn't have to be a castle. It just has to be a shelter. Your car doesn't have to be a status symbol to boost your ego. It just needs to get you from point A to point B. And I'm not saying not to be comfortable or not to have a safe and reliable car, but you don't need the Benz, you don't need the Mercedes, whatever else. And I realized I've kind of started rambling. But the other thing too is, if there is a thing that you're really into, don't be afraid to splurge on and enjoy life. Like maybe cars are your thing and you just love cars, and if that's the case, get yourself a nice car. But I think there's a lot of people out there who aren't really into cars, who buy a car just because it's kind of a status symbol. And I have kind of another buddy. His family, he comes from money. His family's got money, and he's got a good job. His wife's got a good job. They were living in maybe a 3,000 square foot, $400,000 or $500,000 house, and they just recently had a baby. But I remember when they got pregnant, they started talking about moving, and just recently they wound up moving into a probably 5,000 or 6,000 square foot, $800,000 house. And I remember he told me, I remember we were laughing. He said, well, yeah, I have to move. I can't live in this cracker box with a baby. It's to him and his wife and a baby and like a 4 or 5 bedroom, 3,000 square foot house. And he's saying it's a cracker box and he needs a bigger house. But I know he's stressed about money. Has a new baby, has an expensive house, property taxes like $17,000 a year. Just bought a, $60,000, $70,000 Mercedes SUV. And it's just completely unnecessary. So I guess tying this back to myself and kind of what my plans are, what my FIRE number is. A lot of times in the FIRE community, you'll hear people say things like, you need to figure out what your yearly expenses are, multiply that by 25, and that's your retirement number. Now, one thing that kind of confuses me a little bit is 25 times your yearly expenses is a lot different if you're 25 years old than it is if you're 50 years old, right? If you're 25 years old, and we're going to assume you're going to live to 80, you have, 55 more years to live off this money. If you're 60 years old and you're planning on living to 80, you only need that money to last 20 years. So I never really understood the yearly income multiplied by 25 thing. I'm guessing that they're assuming like that money is in investments, you have stock market growth and a 4% withdrawal per year. But if somebody wants to break that down, I've never fully understood that. I'd love for somebody to kind of break that down for me. But essentially, and this would be kind of frugal, but I think I could probably live on about 30 grand a year. Right now, I don't live on that much more than that, but because I have money coming in, I don't really feel the need to be kind of as frugal or whatever. So we'll assume that I can live on 30 grand a year. 30 times 25 years is $750,000. So kind of my retirement number is $750,000. Now that may seem really low to a lot of you guys, and I hear a lot of people say things like, if you listen to the Dave Ramseys or the Susie Ormans, you hear a lot of times these guys will say things like, you can't even retire on $1 million a year these days. And I think most people probably are retiring unless, if you look at how much debt people have, how little money most, I think they say half of Americans don't have $1,000 in savings. So I find it very hard to believe that most people are retiring on $2 million, $3 million a year. I know there people are, but I definitely don't think it's a norm. But for me personally, like if I were to bank $750,000 and I continue having some passive income coming in, whether it be Amazon merch, YouTube, an e-commerce business, etc., I feel like I could retire on a fairly low amount of money, and I wouldn't stop working. I would just, at that point, I would only work on passion projects. So maybe that's YouTube, maybe that's writing a book, maybe that's doing a blog, but whatever money that I can have coming in from that is just kind of gravy. And I think it would be fairly easy to bring in about 30 grand a year very passively, doing only things that I enjoy. And if I could do that, I wouldn't even have to dip into the savings, and that $750,000 could just stay there kind of as a security blanket. Maybe if I wanted to splurge and take a trip, or if there were some unexpected medical expenses or something like that, I got the money to cover it. But really, I can kind of live off what I'm making from passion projects and side hustles and things like that. So I know I've been kind of all over the place. I'm not really an expert in this whole FIRE, financial independence, FI thing. It is kind of a way that I live my life, and for me, it's something that kind of comes naturally to me. But here in 2018, I was going to start kind of following more of the subreddits. Another interesting guy you might want to check out if you're kind of interested in this subject is Mr. Money Mustache. A lot of people say he's a little bit too preachy on hey, ride a bike, save the environment type stuff, but he definitely does have a good message. He retired at the age of 30, and I know a lot of you guys are interested in blogging and content creation and being an influencer and things like that. And if I'm not mistaken, I think he makes about $400,000 I forget if it's a month or a year, but he makes a lot of money off that Mr. Money Mustache blog. So you guys may even be interested in checking him out from an angle of like being an influencer or like turning a passion into an income. So that's what I got for you guys today. Hope you enjoyed it. If so, give it a thumbs up. If you're not subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button below the video. And until next time, guys, I'll check you guys out on the next one.